Padre Pio, the humble Capuchin friar from San Giovanni Rotondo, was not just a man of prayer. He was a living confrontation with the divine and the demonic. He bore the stigmata, the wounds of Christ, and he possessed a spiritual sight that allowed him to see into the very depths of the human soul. When he spoke, it was often with the authority of someone who had just returned from a conversation with eternity. And among all the warnings he delivered from the cramped, dark space of his confessional, there was one that he repeated with terrifying consistency. A warning about the one specific sin that he claimed dragged more souls into eternal ruin, and did so faster than any other transgression known to man. Before we dive into the heart of this urgent message, I want to take a moment to ask, where in the world are you listening to this story right now? Are you perhaps in a quiet apartment in London, driving through the vast landscapes of Texas, or maybe watching late at night in a small town in Brazil? Let me know in the comments below, because knowing where this message reaches is a true inspiration. And if stories about the spiritual reality are important to you, stories that peel back the curtain on the things that truly matter and reveal the hidden history of the saints, please take 2 seconds right now, hit the subscribe button, and join our growing community. It helps us tremendously to keep bringing these powerful historical narratives, documented by the Church, to light. The warning Padre Pio gave was specific, clear, and absolutely uncompromising. It was a message he delivered to priests, to lay people, and especially to the young men who came to him seeking spiritual direction. The sin he pointed to, the sin he called the fastest route to hell, was the sin of impurity. Today we often refer to it as lust, or the misuse of the gift of human sexuality outside of God's design. But Padre Pio simply called it impurity, and his message was crystal clear. Impurity is the sin that drags more souls to hell. This statement wasn't hyperbole. It was a documented fact, logged by the friars who served with him and recorded in the spiritual journals kept in the archives of San Giovanni Rotondo. Friars like Father Tarcisio and others who attended to Padre Pio recorded his words, stunned by the absolute certainty with which he spoke. He saw the spiritual destruction this sin wrought, not as a moral failing in isolation, but as a catastrophic event for the soul, destroying its connection to God with lightning speed. But why? Why did a saint who understood the weight of pride, the venom of hatred, and the coldness of atheism single out impurity as the most dangerous and efficient killer of the soul? Padre Pio explained that the danger of impurity lies not just in the act itself, but in the spiritual cycle of destruction that the sin immediately initiates. It wasn't just a sin, it was a spiritual mechanism designed to isolate, weaken, and ultimately trap the soul. He broke down the reasons into 3 terrifying and very practical points, which we must understand deeply if we are to take his warning seriously. The first reason, according to Padre Pio, was this: impurity is the sin that kills the interior life with the greatest swiftness. Think about the life of prayer. Think about that quiet internal desire to be close to God, to feel His presence, to read Scripture, or to attend Mass with fervor. This is the interior life. It is the breath of the soul. Padre Pio observed that when a person falls into the trap of impurity, that interior life doesn't just get wounded, it is immediately paralyzed and often dies completely. Imagine your soul as a magnificent, well-tended garden. Prayer is the water, and grace is the sunlight. When the sin of impurity enters that garden, it is like a sudden, scorching fire. It doesn't just burn a few leaves, it destroys the roots. The person who is struggling with this sin, even if they were devout before, suddenly loses the desire for God. They abandon prayer. The Bible starts to feel dry and meaningless. Going to Mass becomes a heavy chore, something to rush through rather than a sacred encounter. Padre Pio saw this spiritual dullness constantly. He would look into the eyes of those confessing and see the light of their interior life flickering weakly, sometimes already extinguished. The soul loses its spiritual sensitivity. It can no longer distinguish between the voice of God and the noise of the world. It becomes numb, heavy, and indifferent. This loss of desire, this spiritual paralysis, is the first and perhaps most catastrophic step toward eternal ruin. If you stop desiring God, you stop seeking Him. And if you stop seeking Him, you are already spiritually lost, even if you still attend the exterior motions of faith. The second reason Padre Pio gave for the unique danger of this sin is that it is profoundly and uniquely addictive. He didn't use modern psychological terms, But he used language that was far more powerful. He said it was a heavy chain that the devil used to bind the soul. This sin creates a vicious cycle of temporary pleasure, followed immediately by crushing shame, guilt, and self-hatred. The temporary relief or excitement offered by the sin is a lie, a counterfeit happiness. Once the act is over, the soul is left empty, exposed, and deeply wounded. Because the wound is so painful, the individual often seeks to numb that pain by repeating the sin, hoping that the next time the feeling of emptiness won't be quite so severe, or the pleasure will last just a little longer. But it never does. The chain gets heavier. Padre Pio watched, helpless in a human sense, as souls became enslaved. They would come to him weeping, promising to change, only to return weeks later, broken again, admitting they couldn't break the cycle. The addiction to impurity creates a dependency that is not merely physical or emotional. It is deeply spiritual. It warps the will, making it weak and incapable of choosing the good, even when the person desperately wants to choose the good. The heavy chain of habit prevents them from lifting their gaze toward God and keeps their eyes fixed on the immediate, tangible, but ultimately destructive, lower desires. This spiritual bondage is what makes the sin so effective for the enemy. It convinces the soul that freedom is impossible, that change is pointless, and that God's mercy could never extend to such a repeated, shameful failing. This self-condemnation, driven by the addictive cycle, is what truly seals the soul's fate if it is not broken. But it is the third reason, according to Padre Pio, that provides the final lethal blow. The sin of impurity leads inevitably to the avoidance of confession. This is the ultimate spiritual trap. Padre Pio said it plainly: whoever falls into this sin begins to flee from confession, and whoever flees from confession is losing their soul. Think about the psychological toll of this sin. It is often hidden, intensely personal, and generates profound embarrassment and shame. When a person falls, the devil immediately whispers two things into their ear. First, you are too dirty for God to forgive. And second, you cannot possibly tell a priest what you have done, he will judge you. The shame is so intense, the embarrassment of articulating the sin out loud is so daunting that the individual begins to postpone confession. They say, "I'll wait until I'm truly clean," or "I'll wait until next month when I'm sure I won't fall again." But because the sin is so addictive, they fall again quickly, and the shame doubles. Now they have to confess the sin and their failure to get to confession sooner. This avoidance is the fatal mechanism. Confession is the spiritual emergency room, the immediate route back to the state of grace. It is the only place where the chains of addiction can be broken and the interior life can be instantly resurrected. By making the soul so ashamed that it avoids the very remedy designed to heal it, the sin of impurity ensures the soul remains trapped outside of grace. It is like a gravely wounded soldier refusing to enter the hospital because he is too embarrassed by his uniform. The refusal to seek medical help guarantees death. Padre Pio knew this mechanism intimately. He saw souls who had been given the grace of conversion, who knew the truth, but who were being held captive by the simple inability to walk into the confessional. This avoidance, this spiritual procrastination fueled by shame, is why he considered impurity to be the sin that sends souls to hell quickly. It cuts off the lifeline. To drive this point home, we must look at a truly shocking and well-documented episode from Padre Pio's life, a story that shook the friary of San Giovanni Rotondo to its core and solidified Padre Pio's absolute conviction regarding this warning. There was a young man known to the friars who was a frequent penitent of Padre Pio. This young man was caught in the cycle of impurity. He would confess, receive grace, but then quickly fall back into the sin. Padre Pio, seeing the danger with his spiritual eyes, repeatedly called the young man to a radical change of life. He warned him with paternal love, but also with great urgency, emphasizing the volatile nature of the sin and the fleeting certainty of life. The young man, however, suffered from the spiritual affliction of procrastination. He loved the idea of God, but he loved the temporary pleasures of the world more. When Padre Pio urged him to break the cycle immediately, the young man would smile, perhaps a little arrogantly, and say, "Don't worry, Padre, I know I'm sinning, but I'll confess later. I still have time." He believed in his own future, assuming that the grace of confession would always be available to him, right up until the moment of his death. But life, as Padre Pio often reminded people, is not guaranteed. A short time later, the exact time frame is not specified, but the testimony suggests it was sudden and unexpected. The young man died tragically. The accounts preserved by the Capuchin friars, particularly those recorded by Fray Tarcisio de Servinara, detail what happened next. Padre Pio, who was known to have visions of souls immediately after their passing, had a profound and terrible vision of this young man's immediate judgment. He saw the soul of the young man stand before God, still stained by the sin of impurity, and weighed down by the heavy chain of his repeated falls and his arrogant presumption that he could always confess later. The vision shattered Padre Pio. He was so profoundly shaken by what he witnessed that he retreated immediately to his cell. He locked the door and remained there for long hours, utterly devastated. The friars outside heard his muffled sobs and deep groans of pain. This was not the typical quiet suffering of the saint. This was raw, immediate heartbreak over a soul lost. When he finally emerged, his eyes were red and swollen from weeping. He was pale and deeply distressed. He kept repeating the same words over and over to the friars who dared to ask what had happened. Che tragedia, which means, what a tragedy, what a tragedy. The tragedy was not the death itself, but the fact that the young man had died outside of grace, having ignored the urgent specific warning given by a saint who could see the spiritual reality. He had relied on later, and later never came. This real-life documented case confirms the spiritual physics Padre Pio taught. Impurity is lethal because it combines intense spiritual destruction with the self-deception that leads to the avoidance of the only cure. The young man's story became a dark and permanent anchor for Padre Pio's ministry, urging him to be even more forceful in his warnings about this specific sin. It is absolutely crucial to note that Padre Pio's personal experience and spiritual sight were not isolated. His warning aligns perfectly with one of the most famous and chilling messages delivered directly from heaven in the 20th century, the message of Our Lady of Fatima. In 1917, Our Lady appeared to 3 shepherd children in Portugal. When she spoke to them about the fate of souls, she gave a statement that directly confirmed Padre Pio's observation. Sister Lucia, the longest surviving visionary, recorded the Mother of God's words, a phrase that echoes the saints' counsel. More souls go to hell because of sins of impurity than for any other sin. This connection is explosive. It means that the specific, urgent warning delivered by a simple friar in the Italian confessional was simultaneously being delivered by the Queen of Heaven to 3 children in a remote Portuguese field. The spiritual authorities, the saints and the Blessed Mother, were united on this one point. This sin is the greatest spiritual threat in the modern era. Why is this sin so uniquely devastating? Beyond just the 3 reasons Padre Pio gave, let's look deeper into the spiritual dynamics. Impurity is lethal because it fundamentally destroys interior freedom. When the soul is pure, it is light, free, and oriented toward truth. When it is impure, it becomes enslaved to fleeting sensations. The person loses the ability to make truly free choices, constantly being pulled back by the weight of desire and habit. True freedom is the ability to choose the good. Impurity destroys this ability. Furthermore, this sin feeds the most dangerous vice of all, pride. How does impurity feed pride? Because it creates a life of secrecy and double standards. The person struggling with this sin often appears virtuous and devout on the outside, but harbors a deep, secret world of vice within. This necessity for secrecy fosters hypocrisy, and hypocrisy is the food of pride. The soul learns to live a lie, convincing itself that its private life has no impact on its public devotion. Padre Pio saw this double life as a slow, corrosive poison that eventually hardens the heart against all genuine spiritual growth. The heart, once hardened, becomes indifferent. This is what spiritual writers call tibieza, or lukewarmness. The soul is neither hot nor cold. It is simply indifferent to the things of God. The constant, repetitive nature of the sin, followed by the shame, dulls the conscience. The person stops fighting, stops caring, and enters a state of spiritual adormecimiento, a deep sleep of the soul. They are alive physically, but their soul is dormant, unresponsive to the stirrings of grace. Padre Pio warned that the soul in this state cannot look at God. Purity is necessary to see God, as the scriptures tell us. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. Impurity clouds the spiritual vision, making the very idea of God his holiness, his goodness, his light unbearable. The soul finds darkness more comfortable than light, and thus begins to actively flee the light of truth and grace. This is the cycle of ruin that Padre Pio spent his life fighting against in the confessional. It is a terrifying picture, a fast track to eternal separation. But Padre Pio was not just a prophet of doom. He was a physician of souls. He was a saint of hope, mercy, and resurrection. Just as he warned about the danger, he also provided the clear, immediate, and powerful remedies necessary to break the chains and reclaim spiritual freedom. It is absolutely vital that we conclude not with despair, but with the practical hope he offered to every single penitent. Padre Pio's prescribed cure for impurity was not a single grand act, but a disciplined, consistent routine of spiritual warfare. He taught that since the sin attacks the whole spiritual system, the fight must use all the weapons available to the Church. The first and most critical step is frequent confession. This is non-negotiable. If the sin of impurity makes you avoid confession, then the cure is to run to the confessional immediately after a fall, or even when you feel the temptation overwhelming you. Padre Pio taught that the power of the sacrament is immense. It doesn't just forgive the past sin, it injects a fresh dose of grace, restoring the spiritual immune system and strengthening the will against the next temptation. He urged people to confess not just monthly, but weekly if necessary, especially when battling a deep-seated habit. The frequency of confession is what breaks the cycle of shame and procrastination. It forces the soul into the light, where the darkness cannot survive. The second essential weapon is the rosary daily. Padre Pio called the rosary his weapon against the forces of evil. The rosary, prayed with attention, is a powerful shield against temptation because it directs the mind and the heart toward the purity of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the life of Christ. It is a concrete act of turning the mind away from the distracting noise and toward contemplation. When the soul is focused on the mysteries of the rosary, the temptation loses its grip. Third, he insisted on the flight from the occasions of sin. This is perhaps the most practical and difficult advice. Padre Pio knew that willpower alone is often not enough. If you know that a certain place, a certain person, a certain type of media, or a certain moment of idleness leads you into temptation, you must cut it off completely. He taught that we must not play games with temptation. If you stand too close to the edge of the cliff, you will eventually fall. The fight for purity is often won not by confronting the sin head-on, but by avoiding the circumstances that make the sin possible. This requires honesty, courage, and a willingness to make real, concrete changes in daily life, such as changing routes, changing social circles, or eliminating access to certain media. Fourth, Padre Pio encouraged adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. Spending time in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist is like placing the soul under a spiritual sun lamp. It cleanses the interior life, restores sensitivity, and fills the emptiness that the sin of impurity exploits. Adoration is a silent, powerful act of receiving grace, which strengthens the will and makes the soul more resistant to temptation. Finally, Padre Pio always finished with the ultimate message of hope and divine mercy. No matter how dark the struggle, no matter how many times the person has fallen, he reminded them of the infinite capacity of God's forgiveness. He would say with the deep conviction of a man who had seen the face of God, "Do not be afraid. No sin is greater than the mercy of God." This is the great truth that must anchor our hearts. The sin of impurity is indeed a devastating spiritual killer, and Padre Pio's warning must be taken seriously. But the power of God's mercy is infinitely greater than the power of any sin or any addiction. The key is simply to turn back, to run to the confessional, to pick up the rosary, and to fight the good fight with the weapons of grace that Padre Pio championed. The tragedy is not falling. The tragedy is remaining on the ground out of shame and refusing the hand of mercy stretched out from the confessional. Take Padre Pio's warning as an urgent call to action, but take his promise of mercy as the ultimate guarantee of victory. The battle for purity is hard, but with the grace of God, freedom and holiness are always within reach.